So the paper is quite long, and I've tried to reduce some pages as I was directed anyway. And so I start reading from the third page. In the conclusion of the book, Discovering Religious History in the Modern Age, I propose the difference between German and French scholars' view on history of religions and modernity, as G. Kippenberg states the following: encompassing a view of modernity within a view of the history of religion formed the pragmatic side of the new paradigm of the history of religions, and explains the modes of the descriptions. Vast and remote religions were described and counterpart the claims of modern society for a complete renunciation of religions. This point concludes a masterful study that begins with the conceptualization of the debate on the nature of discourses on religion. The introduction to the American edition usefully situates it by evoking a number of references. The first reference dwells on the part of the scholar in the invention of religions. The second correlates scholarship, teaching religion and politics. These are positions in the history of discipline. Technically, from the disciplinary requirements, it should be possible to proceed from one's self-examination within a given culture and at a given time. The viewpoints could organize the issue, that of the historian and that of the missiologist, both considering how really ethically religious is Africa. They express a point that cannot bypass new forms of presence of Christianity and Islam. Any problematization of interactions between these two religious systems and the local traditional religious expressions faces the fact of apparently incomparable grammars. The Africanization of Christianity or Islam designates also different processes. For instance, in East Africa, Swahili Islam offers many angles. Swahili are the people of East Africa, the coast of East Africa. People there are called Swahili. So Swahili Islam offers many angles. Historically, in terms of the first Islamic migration to Ethiopia in the year 614 Anno Domini, and the coexistence of Islam and the Coptic Church, for instance. And centuries later, down the coast, the year 1505, confrontation in Mombasa between Christian Portuguese and Swahilis. Thousands of African Muslims are converting now to Christianity each year. The other way around too, it seems. In both cases, pious propaganda defines grounds of competition mechanism. Possibly a similar goal would have motivated East African Catholics to recurrent a valued symbol. With the matters of Mombasa, Malak Galen brings to light a major mediation in the name of faith. Always part of the Christian imperial convox of the 19th century colonial enterprise was the native catechist mediation. These are the necessary agents by which the mission identifies with its aid. They are first efficient go-between auxiliaries of the missionaries and the cultured converts. Second, servants of the latter were called upon to inhabit within the new culture through the metamorphosis of traditional rituals. And they are living testimonies of the mutation of an original place into a new religious space. In such a living paradigm, three mediations, the human body actualizes a new statue. The new letter reflects a symbol and at the same time corresponds to a testimony. They are firmly interrelated within a transcending fellowship. As of today, let's refer to a few breakdowns which cannot be ignored. Here are the statements on African affairs from three angles. to begin with one from Thomas P.M. Bernard in his book, Great Powers of 2009. First, he says, China once had all the same problems that Africa suffers today: warlords, civil conflicts, unending war, corruption, tyrants. And how did China pull itself together economically? And indeed, he gives the following suggestion. As Deng's famous magazine put it, it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Most of what ends up working in Africa will probably come as a surprise, just as it did in China. And finally, the author, P.M. Barnett, gives a realist position which he presents in his same book. Economist Paul Collier, for example, estimates that 40% of military spending in Africa is made possible by official developmental aid flows, and that many military coups are nothing more than periodic profit-taking exercises. To reflect this from a statement that celebrated years before this influential book in political economy, here are the main lines of the official declaration of Pan-African meeting of Third World theologians that took place in Accra, Ghana in 1977. It placed the success of story of Christianity and at the same time accented what is presented as the ethnicity of Africa, from which the document evaluates the presence of Christianity in Africa, the emergence of Christian African theological practices as expressed in its relation to three political axes. 1. African traditional religion perceived as stepping stones of the gospel. That signifies a critical engagement with the Bible and Black liberation theology from South Africa. The declaration affirms interacting references: the Bible and Christian tradition, African anthropology, traditional religion, African independent churches, and finally what it calls African realities that include reference to socioeconomic factors, colonialism and racism, sexism, and other forms of cultural alienation. As surprising as it might seem, a concept articulates the apparent coherence of this declaration. It is singularity. It cannot be accidental that such a concept seems to be a key to different approaches. From Latin, the singular or singularis is what cannot be confused from the objective reality that the Latin language, for instance, denotes under ambo, the designation of two, on what plurality expressions represent. Singularis, any human life and its uniqueness signify a different relation to the genesis of this universe of ours. Let's take a different angle by bringing in three Christian witnesses from 20th century dynamics. They believed in an African Christianity. John V. Taylor, the General Secretary of the Church Missionary Society and Bishop of Winchester, is the author of the Primal Vision. Reflecting on the African religious experience, he observed that ethnologists haven't yet been able to agree as to what place God occupies in the African worldview. In this statement, one has a judgment on the anthropological knowledge as opposed to what will possibly be expected from the spiritual motion represented in a missionizing process. Only the practice of the presence of God in a sacrament and meditation, in a steady, painful flowering of sensitivity to all presences, can restore and integrate so that evenness can be maintained. Compassion is the final operative word to define what the way of presence really means. It sums up the listening, responsive, agonizing receptivity of the prophet and of the poet. Secondly, the Belgian Franciscan Placer temples also a missionary, the well-known author of Bantu philosophy. In reflection of the process that legitimized Bantu philosophy, Bantu are the majority peoples of Black Africa, southern part of Sahara, sub-Saharan Africa. Majority of people there are called the Bantu people. So, Bantu philosophy, measuring its limits, he refers to his own conversion. This Basque temple refers to his own conversion. I used to believe that after discovering the Bantu personality, I would become again the pastor, the chief, the doctor, now recognized as the master of technique of an adopted language, so teach Christianity. I suddenly understood in this encounter, person to person, soul to soul, being to being, that we had moved from a reciprocal knowledge to a situation of sympathy, in brief, of love, and that precisely Christianity had been born again and recommended. And finally, from an African priest, Jean-Marc Ella, an academic with a doctorate in theology and sociology, who chose a pastoral commitment in rural areas of northern Cameroon. His testimony, entitled Mafui de Africain, cycles on itself in a comment on the great challenge to faith and to theology in Africa, which is our historical situation that snatches Christianity out of the meaninglessness. Ella has only a question: how can the Easter message once again become a well where Christians and the churches can draw strength to lead ahead? Or where's thy victory? That is the question I ask myself in my faith as an African, as the third millennium draws near. These testimonies are statements in two traditions, Christian and African. They tell of a manner of existing in a story of a revelation and in relation to will and to truth. They attest also to the pitfall from conflicts of existing in the language of faith detached from or marked by constraints of a disciplinary objectivity. The assessment on ways of converting it and other viewpoints. One can conceptualize these testimonies from a hypothesis. At least three features that might qualify the three voices come to mind. The universalization of 19th century political economy, the ethical challenges of the religions of the book, and their contradictory interpretation about fundamentals concerning human life. From critical viewpoint, one could test them from a number of commonsensical readings. Thus, on the one hand, for example, Jean Potoka's book, which is called Heretical Essays, about the uncertain stability of politics, of ethics according to Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Ethics, and the significance of Polemos' legacy in the Western tradition. On the other hand, from Paul Ricard's rendering of the Polemos narrative in the French version of Potoka's text, the link between the history of politics and the inherent violence that marks any conversion of cultural economies. My grandfather converted to the religion of the book. Astute, he made my father a Christian and my aunt, the sister, a Muslim. The Abrahamic Lord is the jealous one, mediated in many vices, all worked out in lines, often removed from human restrictions. Can one be Christian, accept African prescriptions on ancestorship, and attend Islamic prayers? The banality of the question in Mombasa or in Dakar may seem horrific elsewhere, yet accommodations could meet the paratory of public lecture. Indeed, as it is common sense, believers might disagree on ways of dissension about those, says the Quran, Allah tasketh not a soul beyond its scope. This concerned soul, its practical meaning, is decoded in the language of the scholar the one about whom it is written elsewhere in the Quran. We never sent before thee any messengers but lo, they are food and walked in the markets. And we have appointed some of you a test for others. Will ye be steadfast? And thy Lord is ever seer. Patrick Ofori's book, Islam in Africa, South of the Sahara, and Samir M. Zogbi's Islam in Sub-Saharan Africa have collected entries in largely ignored field of scholarship important in cultural identity and faith.